Hey babies, it's your favorite host, Mr. BMG, back at it again with another episode of The Messiest Bitch on the Internet. Let's dig in. So the first story I'd like to unpack is Disney's Mount Rushmore. So they had Raven Simone, Miley Cyrus, Selena Gomez, and Zendaya Coleman as Disney's Mount Rushmore. This list was based on an internet publication which deemed it fit to rank these four individuals as the pinnacle of Disney entertainment. I think certain individuals may not necessarily need to be on the list, not to take away from their greatness, but I think just to, as a reflection of their impact on Disney particularly, I think there were certain key individuals which made that particular network a really big household name, and it was at around the same sort of time period where it really peaked. So just unpacking, the people on that list, and also just giving a background of Disney. So I feel like I grew up, quite fervently watching Disney. I was really always on Disney Channel and watching some or other show on it. Not necessarily the animated shows, because I've just never really been a fan of animated shows other than Tom and Jerry when I was like really young, and Scooby-Doo and Powerpuff Girls, obviously. I've never really been like that type of animated queen or, anime, whatever you call it. It's just never been my thing. So all the shows I used to watch were somewhat true to life, but not obviously like it's like a sitcom. It's like some type of comedy show with real people, not animated beings. So yeah, and for those reasons, I feel like if we're reflecting on who was around, who was on the television in the early 2000s on Disney Channel, we of course cannot ignore the fact that Lizzie McGuire, aka Hilary Duff, was the girl to beat. She was the girl on high rotation. She was the girl with the show, the Lizzie McGuire show, and she became so famous and such a staple on television that people thought that her real name was Lizzie McGuire. See where I'm going with this? I hope you keep following, because this is somewhat going to be a recurring theme of a lot of the Disney starlets, as we unpack them. But essentially, Lizzie McGuire, the Lizzie McGuire show was very funny, offbeat, and very much relatable to, the identity of many of the people who were watching at the time, as well as people who were maybe not necessarily of that age, but just kind of enjoyed, the kitchen table nature of, the Lizzie McGuire show. So I think that really set the foundation for what essentially Disney was going to do in the rest of that particular decade. The success of the show led to movies, led to merchandise, led to many different spin-off projects centered around the duplication of this entity, the machine that was the Lizzie McGuire show, and also just the personality of the person that you almost couldn't separate from who they were in their personal life versus the character. It became the selling point essentially. Disney realized that they could essentially make stars that were acting, but was the whole concept and the life that's built around this person became so realistic that it blurred the lines between, fact and fiction. And that made those characters way more relatable and have way more of a lasting impact on the people watching the show than any other movie that you'd watch and sort of be aware that this person is a character. You'd almost think that, hey, this is really this person's life, And in some ways, shows like that kind of were what reality shows have become today, if you think about it. Reality shows today are still real, but there's some performative element to it, and that sort of gives it the aspirational piece, that yes, it's real, but there's still a sense of celebrity to it and something to aspire, So yeah, the Lizzie McGuire show was absolutely very successful. Ignoring Hilary Duff from the Mount Rushmore of Disney was just not the way to go, because she set the foundation. She may not have had the longest run in terms of that success momentum that the Disney Channel had within that time period, but she definitely laid the foundation for the rest of the girls and the rest of the people to come. And then, of course, subsequent to Hilary Duff, Raven Simone was in the works with her own show. And she had also actually been on the Disney Channel before the Hilary Duff, Lizzie McGuire show. She was there in the 1990s on a show that was kind of like to do with people in space, something to that effect. That was before my time, But she was within all of that. And obviously before that, she was on The Cosby Show, which was really successful. So Raven's success, didn't necessarily start on the Disney Channel, but it definitely got amplified on the Disney Channel. And that's really where she took off and became a staple within everyone's living rooms, And essentially leading up to that, So Raven, the Cheetah Girls happened, and essentially continued subsequent to that. And I think that was kind of a replication of the Lizzie McGuire formula. They had a successful show, and somehow the show got converted into a movie, or somebody on the show who was really successful on the show kind of became a movie star, and the association between the two platforms was very strong to leverage, strong enough to leverage from. And so they started merchandising and, essentially replicating the success of the one to benefit the success of the other through the relationships, and essentially multiply their income, which was a genius formula. Again, I feel like started by the Lizzie McGuire, and Hilary Duff era of the Disney Channel. And so That's So Raven was really successful, and that was really my show. Like, if you knew me as a kid, you would know that That's So Raven, do not interrupt me when that show is playing. That is my time, and even if I've watched the show 500 times, I'm going to watch it forever and forever and forever and keep on watching it, and even say the lines before they say it, because that was a sense of comfort for me. It was comfort television. Absolutely loved the show, and yeah, it was really successful because at the time it was the most successful show on Disney and broke so many different records. So again, Raven at the time built from that Lizzie McGuire scaffolding, and then of course we had the era of High School Musical, and we had the likes of Ashley Tisdale, who was also on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, who was also very, very successful, and for me is actually somebody to mention who's of note within that 2000s era. She was a villain on High School Musical, but on Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, she was kind of like the heroine, the smart, savvy, modest girl who's, also very opinionated and very likable. So the two contrasts, I think, made people like her in both roles, and were also essentially both roles were quite believable for the audience, and she sold that. So I do feel like Ashley Tisdale is also an honorary mention of that Disney Mount Rushmore. If there were 5 places, I would definitely put Ashley Tisdale, because she was within the High School Musical era, and we all know the High School Musical era, I would say, maybe was the beginning of obsessive fandom of, the Disney Channel. That sort of era, and the Hannah Montana era, which is essentially kind of happened more around the same time. They almost premiered within a couple of months from each other, and that era was really just when Disney just absolutely blew up into this mega monster of a channel with so much fanfare. Everyone knows how successful High School Musical was, because High School Musical took over the primary and high schools of many different, schools all over the world. Everyone wanted to be Troy if they were like a straight dude, and everyone wanted to be Gabriella if they were like a girl, or, one of the girls. So I feel like it was really quite a time. Nobody, everyone knew the lyrics to the High School Musical songs. Everyone wanted to be within a school like High School Musical, and it was a really, really exciting time for Disney, because then they could, essentially profit off of the obsession of the shows with merchandise, because that just, if you buy the Hannah Montana or the High School Musical CD, and if you buy the High School Musical, I don't know, like random stuff that they would sell, toys and, pancakes, or like stupid accessories that they would sell, you would just feel that much closer, and it will just remind you even more, and also benefit them, because it's just making you more obsessed with the next installment or whatever else that they needed to do. So genius marketing move. I do feel like that was really the beginning of the peak of the Disney machine. And then obviously we had the Hannah Montana, Miley Cyrus era, after the Raven, Cheetah Girls, and before that the Hilary Duff, Lizzie McGuire era, and that just became a monster of a thing. And so the Hannah Montana, Miley Cyrus era came and blossomed in the Disney machine, and essentially took that machine to the next level. And on the backdrop of this, what they had perfected was finding a young talent, putting them into a role that they do so convincingly well that people believe them to be the character, and creating that relatability helped them to profit off of all of the merchandise and all of the different products they essentially created to help boost that revenue stream, and Hannah Montana was no exception. It just kind of broke all the records, because right place, right time, right expertise, and right experience. And yeah, I feel like the Hannah Montana, Miley Cyrus era is yet to be replicated on the Disney Channel, because I think they just got it right. They really did get it right. That show was so successful. Outside of That's So Raven, Hannah Montana, and obviously The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, but That's So Raven and Hannah Montana were really those shows for me. Like, they were those shows for millions and millions of people, and they were just so good. And no matter how many times you've watched them, you're going to keep on going back and watching more and more and more, and singing along to songs, and being within that environment and being a part of the story. And I think that was magic. That was absolutely magic, and really the golden era of the Disney Channel. Honorable mention, before we go to Selena Gomez, is Demi Lovato. I think Demi Lovato was really that girl on Disney. She was not a blonde girl, right? She wasn't a typical girl you'd think would be famous for a white girl, because she had black hair. Like, she was, she wasn't like that blonde girl, the girl next door type of thing. But there was something that was so likable about her. I liked her when she actually had the gap between her teeth, like on Sunny with a Chance. back when she was just a really pure little girl. Like, for me, I really absolutely loved Demi. Demi's growth, just seeing Demi's growth on the Disney Channel and, you know, into this mainstream machine of Camp Rock, which is basically the follow-up to High School Musical, and all of that success and, you know, just that talent, I think was so beautiful, you know, to see manifest. And she's definitely an honorable mention, honorary mention, in terms of if there were 6 places, you know, because we've now added, you know, your Ashley Tisdale, but if there were 6 places, then we'll definitely have Demi Lovato and Ashley Tisdale within that Mount Rushmore, you know, but there are only 4, and the last one of those 4 is Selena Gomez, who, you know, chaired the Wizards of Waverly Place, which was absolutely incredible, you know. In some ways, I think it was an American sitcom adaptation of the Harry Potter franchise, which was very successful at the time as well, you know, and it's still successful to this day because people keep on rewatching those movies as comfort movies, right? It's like you're going to start back from The Philosopher's Stone all the way to Deathly Hallows Part 2, or whenever it ended. Americans wanted their version of the Harry Potter franchise, and they somehow managed to develop that show as a sitcom on the Disney Channel, which was already a successful platform and the best way to probably reach children at the time who were as obsessed with, you know, the Warner Brothers' Harry Potter franchise, you know. And I think that's, again, like, that happens a lot in the industry, right? Like copy pasting, whether it's musicians, you copy paste the musician who existed in a particular era into the next era through a different person, and essentially they were just copying and pasting a formula that worked for the Warner Brothers, you know, through Harry Potter into this Disney machine, which has been successful with many other concepts. And she also just happened to be at the right place at the right time and became Alex Russo, and that completely changed her life to this day. I think of all of the Disney starlets, she's probably still the most followed on social media because she really was just at the right place at the right time. Now, look, was her show as impactful as Hannah Montana and That's So Raven? Not necessarily. Was the success of That's So Raven and Hannah Montana a chief reason for maybe the success of this show? Definitely, because it came in when Disney's reputation was hotter than ever, you know, so it could only be essentially, I would say, the last born of that really Disney success story. And you know what happens to the last borns? The last borns get the best of everything, right? In any different family, because you're probably the kid that grows up within the burbs, and really when your parents haven't made it, like when they're really successful in their prime, that's when you grow up. So you're gonna get all of those benefits. And I feel like the Wizards of Waverly Place and Selena Gomez got a lot of those fruits from parents such as Hannah Montana and That's So Raven and Lizzie McGuire. It wasn't as obsessively good as the other ones, but still very impactful, very successful. And why Selena Gomez deserves to be, you know, within the Mount Rushmore of the Disney Channel. Moving on to the next story, I found, you know, the Shade Room reporting about some of the stories that were happening on the streets about, you know, people's reactions to viral moments on The Real Housewives, you know, and I found it so funny because 90% of those comments related to the Atlanta Housewives, and as they should, right? Like, I loved how it was quite evident that that show's success spoke for itself, you know. And this is a completely change of topic from like Disney Channel to The Real Housewives, but I do feel like, again, right, this lifelike image that was created in these shows that were scripted completely kind of became modern day television, because the Housewives franchises are kind of now a staple of current contemporary television, you know, and that's all everyone talks about, many different franchises, many different people within those franchises. So it took that format of, let's create a character, let's let them play out their lives in a way that's so convincingly real that the people identify with them. Now, reality TV is real. These are these people, right? They're not necessarily acting, but there is a performative element within reality TV because it's aspirational. They want you to see these people as desirable, aspirational, successful, you know, and basically worthy of being on television, which in some ways kind of makes it scripted, even though it's these people's real lives. But you may obviously decide to amplify and embellish the way you tell a story or the way you experience a story and things that are happening to you, because, you know, you have to tell a story. It's you're on the show, it's a reality show. And I do feel like, you know, the Housewives of Atlanta are a staple of the Housewives franchise, the main reason of the success of the Housewives franchise, and also represents in some ways the heyday, the Disney era, mid to late 2000s era, is the Real Housewives of Atlanta's run when it was sort of within its first 7 seasons. They were everywhere. They were so successful. Everyone was talking about them. So I did notice that a lot of the viral moments from the Real Housewives franchise were from Atlanta, notably like the whole Lindsay Lohan daddy, with the whole Nene running after Lindsay Lohan daddy. And I just never, to this day, I just still don't get it. Like, it was just the most random shit ever. Like, how did Lindsay Lohan daddy, and like just that whole scene, how did it even come about? It was just such random gold, and I always have an appreciation for Nene Leakes when she had the brown hair, but when she was this hungry character who had everything to gain and nothing to lose, and so every single moment that she gave us on television was just gold. It was a gem. It was also kind of very natural, you know, looking. It was just kind of this person going about whatever they're going about, still with a performative element, right? But also you can see that this person just has this goofy personality and is ready to give us a moment, as they should be, because it's television. We still need to be entertained in some way. So yeah, that was quite heartwarming to see, because that was another franchise I grew up with. As much as the Disney Channel really represented my earlier childhood, I'll definitely say the Housewives, you know, represented sort of my teenage and also just like early adult years, like my 20s, because I've just been, I'd say that's the most consistent show that I've watched for many different years in various iterations of it. And just the reality show format is something that I've always just really loved. And yeah, man, the Housewives, Lindsay Lohan Daddy, that was a cool, cute little recap. Kenya Moore twirling, and being gone with the wind, fabulous, you know, that was also really cute. And also, didn't Beyonce in Formation speak of twirling on her haters, you know? Like, I found that so cute. Like a nod to Kenya Moore. And if she actually did say, did she? I think she did in my mind. Because I have a tendency to also make up lyrics sometimes, like when the beat is going and maybe what I'm saying sounds like the actual lyrics. I can't just make up my own lyrics, and then when I look it up later on, it's like, well, those were not the lyrics. But nevertheless, they make sense to me. And Beyonce twirled on her haters, like Miss Kenya twirling on her haters too, twirling on Britt Eady and all of those people. So yeah, that was such a cute recap. And talking about Kenya Moore, you know, I did really like the fact that, you know, she sort of addressed the context of the show as it's happening. So she now has this confessionals series called Kenya Moore Confessionals. The confessionals they tried to silence is what kind of the title alludes to. And she's essentially just talking about the things that were shown on, you know, the show for the episodes that she was on it, and also her take of what she would have liked to say as all of that was happening, and setting things into perspective, you know, in terms of what she ended up going through, you know, with production, with the show, and with Britt Eady. And I think it was actually a very nice little summary of everything that happened. She spoke of some of the scenes that we didn't see, and how there was mention of further violence from this character on the show, and also confirmed a lot of the things that I wanted to say, because I feel like I noted once on, you know, I mentioned online at some point on the streets of the internet that I do feel like Britt was brought onto the show to be a villain, you know, and in some ways to replace Kenya Moore, because Kenya Moore was the villain of the show and she was the big dog of the show. So in some ways I feel like production wanted a new villain, and they wanted to phase out the old villain by kind of making them unlikable, making them more of a villain and less polarizing, and by doing that making the public not necessarily like them, and so they dissolve their character and essentially they exit the show. What I think the producers were not maybe necessarily bargaining for was the fact that Kenya Moore, yes, is a villain. She may be very unlikable to other people, but she's also very likable to others, so she is polarizing. And in pushing the story of the revenge porn out there, kind of also made, I feel like was kind of also done to sort of villainize her, even though she's already a villain, but to sort of make her less polarizing, like to get those people who actually kind of like her to not like her. And I feel like she kind of cleverly did not play into that, and as evidenced by the streets of the internet, everyone, a lot of people are kind of on her side in the whole situation, just by seeing how everything played out. And, you know, essentially kind of didn't work out. Like, if that was their plan, kind of didn't work out, because I almost feel like Kenya Moore is more likable now than ever in the eyes of a lot of people on the streets of the internet, because they're defending her in a way that I've never seen her being defended, you know, which is interesting, and that's very new. And she's gotten quite a lot of attention from the whole process, and I think her transparency in going on, you know, and creating her own confessionals, I think has made the audience like her even more, because I think the more she talks, the more she kind of shows that she has nothing to hide, and that just makes the people who aren't talking as much worse. Next story. Tracee Ellis Ross had an interview, which is so interesting that I'm actually speaking about Tracee Ellis Ross after Kenya Moore, because I do feel like the two women share a lot. You know, I feel like the two women have very kind of similar lives but different lives. Kenya has children, but Tracee doesn't, and Kenya has or was married. I'm not sure if Tracee was married, but I feel like in some ways they have had some similar lives, because Kenya only had kids later on in life, and Tracee doesn't want, I don't think Tracee wants to have children, and essentially they spent most of their lives just by themselves. So I feel like they've got such great parallels, and in a good way, great to mention one after the other, because they're very relatable. But yeah, so she went on Michelle Obama's podcast and was essentially just speaking about the grief that she's experiencing, or she has experienced, from not having children and a husband. And I found that probably very relatable to, like, probably a lot of women found that very relatable, you know, just in terms of the high amount of people who are actually single, or people who are lonely within their relationships, I think could relate to her, because in some ways, you're by yourself, right? So I feel like that interview probably had a lot of crossover appeal, and the way she addressed everything, for me, I love that, because it drew so many parallels to her character on Girlfriends. She's a successful person, you know, and who's essentially just on the pursuit of trying to settle down and find a good person. But a lot of the people that she's come across aren't necessarily making the cut, and in some ways she probably does have abandonment issues, because, you know, she can't necessarily trust, with all of the men that she has gone through, can't necessarily trust the next person to not let them down. And I feel like there were so many parallels with her personal life, and I think made the interview even more meaningful. You know, when life imitates art and art imitates life, I think there's something about it that just becomes so relatable, but you also kind of love that show or that work of art even more, because you know that it's coming from a real place. And for me, that's what made her interview very powerful, you know, and a very lucid experience in how she was sort of just reflecting on the very real realities of it, and difficulties of not even being able to use social media, and her preferring to meet people in person, which I think it should be. That's the way it should be, you know. And yeah, man, I don't see her as any less of a person because she doesn't have a tribe of people that she is attached to. I think more power to you for being able to face life by yourself, you know, and being confident enough to thrive in that. Next story I want to get into is the Vogue Met issue documentary. So the making of the Met issue, and they released a documentary on YouTube about that, and it had your Law Roach, it had obviously ASAP Rocky the cover star, and it had Dapper Dan, it had the guy, what's his name? It had so many different stars on the show, but a lot of black stars. It had Janelle Monáe. There were so many different people that were within the making of the Met issue in the documentary, but obviously Law Roach was kind of the editor of it, and so his role that he played was pretty big, and I really liked that. I just loved this Afrocentric or black-centric Vogue issue, and the people involved, and it also made me actually see Law Roach in a very different light, but in a good light, because even in the way I've seen him previously was always good, but in an even more elevated light, I think he could actually do well within that whole editorial space. Obviously he's a stylist, that's what he's kind of first and foremost at the core, but I think just being within that editorial media space, I think could really be something that he could do, because he looks really good, he looks the part, and love just his work. Loved him on Legendary, which I love that show so much, you guys. I do feel like Legendary was that one thing that black queer people had, and then it got cancelled at some point, but I feel like it should be protected at all costs. So if it was ever relaunched, I would continue to watch it fervently so that it does not get cancelled, or I don't know, man, you guys just need to bring it back. Legendary was so good, but I love Law Roach on Legendary. You did what needed to be done, okay? And I love Law Roach within the editorial capacity. I love Law Roach as a stylist, and that was a very groundbreaking issue for Vogue, even though I feel like it was more so digital, like the person was digital. I think it was still very impactful and, reflective of, one, the theme that the Met is going to be, which is good and refreshing, but two, the changing landscape of fashion, because there were quite a lot of mentions of, black labels, Dapper Dan, and just who that person is within the New York City fashion landscape. And I just found that so impactful, so beautiful, and everything was just so black and so high fashion and so prominent, and rightfully so, rightfully in that moment, perfect. I absolutely love that documentary, and I actually can't wait for the Met, and just to see what people do with that theme, but also to see the whole themes central, the whole theme of being centered around black menswear and just black fashion in general, not necessarily remaining as a theme, but it being within the high fashion cultural zeitgeist. Obviously the involvement of Pharrell Williams within the documentary also elevated that, because he is at the helm of the biggest luxury brand and group. He's at the helm creatively, of EMH, which is a big deal. So I do hope that, the relevance of black people in fashion will be included in mainstream culture, not necessarily just as a theme, but just as a way of being, and be respected. Because yes, black people have really influenced the culture, just in general, and popular culture. And I do feel like it's high time that they actually do get the recognition. And I think Vogue centering, the Met Gala around that, I think is quite beautiful. So yeah, man, the Vogue Met issue documentary and the upcoming Met Gala is going to be so exciting, and I can't wait. Obviously, I will be covering that, so stay tuned. Also, shout out to Burna Boy as the last story. I definitely had to save this for last because I think it was so incredible. But shout out to Burna Boy for filling up Stade de France. Stade de France has a capacity of 100K, and that was absolutely incredible. So shout out to you, Burna Boy. Like, obviously, we knew you could do it because you are a stadium artist and really monumental within the Afrobeats game, but also just within the music game, period. So well done, Burna Boy, and definitely can't wait to see you in concert soon. And also can't wait for your new album. I know you announced that you are releasing a new album, so I feel like that's going to be quite something, for people to anticipate. And I know that it's going to be quite very much in tune with the person that he is and the character that he is, and the larger than life persona that he has. So can't wait for that. So shout out to Burna Boy. Anyway, babies, I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Messiest Bitch on the Internet. And as always, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And check out our very new show and very, very exciting Catching Flights series. And journey with me as I travel through many different places and many different cities. And yeah, man, live my best life and share it with the world. So join me on that show and definitely check it out. It's so good, I promise. It's so, so, so good. And also catch us on Instagram at BigMoneyEntertainment_. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.